Okay, hey everybody, Tekking101 here, and I'll be honest with you, today I really didn't have an idea for a video. So instead, we're going to be answering your questions from Twitter. Ugh. But they're still your questions, and they're One Piece related, so they should be mostly good. I'll be honest with you, I was watching Wired's YouTube channel earlier today, and they have a series on there called the Tech Support series, and I love it. Basically, they'll get like various experts from like all over the world to come in and answer questions from Twitter based off of their expertise, and they've done it on everything. They've been doing it for years. They had Gordon Ramsay on there once to do like cooking support. They had Nick Offerman with woodworking support. They've had musicians. They've had scientists. They have Neil deGrasse Tyson. Bill Nye was on there like 3 times. They've had ones about more like social stuff. There was a lady that was in a cult once, and she was answering a bunch of questions about cults. There was a person that was an astronomer. There was a question about like an entomologist. They had him on there a few times. Like, I love that series to death because it takes people that are experts in their field and just like gives them free reign to explain stuff to the world. So I don't know if they're ever going to do One Piece support, and if they did, they would probably just pick Oda to do it. But if he's not available, I'll pull up the reins. I'll put on the straw hat. I'll answer the One Piece questions. So yes, this is One Piece support. Can we call it that? I don't think we can call it that. I might not be able to call it that. This is Tekking answers questions in an unrelated format from Wired's Tech Support series. Okay, first question. What happens when 2 people take a bite from the same devil fruit at the same time? Does it choose one person, or do neither of the people get devil fruit powers because they themselves did not finish the whole fruit? Okay, so devil fruits, you do not have to eat the whole fruit in order to get devil fruit powers. Okay, this has been shown plenty of times throughout the story. Sometimes, if you want to, you can eat the whole fruit. In like the cases with Buggy, who just like ate the whole thing in one bite. Luffy was kind of the same way, but it's very possible to get the devil fruit ability just by taking one bite out of it. It's been stated devil fruits taste very badly, and it's also been stated that after you take a single bite of the devil fruit, the fruit just basically turns into this rotten, disgusting piece of fruit. Like, you could continue to eat it if you wanted to, but you would not get the power. This was explained during Ace's light novel, actually, between Ace and Mas Deuce, who they found the Maranomi on this deserted island in the east, and they were starving to death, so they basically took a bite out of it. Ace just happened to eat the Maranomi first, so he was the one that received the power. Mas Deuce ate it as well, but he just ate it a little bit after Ace did. If Mask would have eaten his fruit just like a fraction of a second earlier than Ace, then he would have had the power of the Flame fruit. This comes back to the idea that when it comes to natural devil fruit abilities, you can only have one ability at one time with one user of the fruit. After that person dies, the fruit will be reincarnated, and then the power will resume to the next person that eats that fruit. Next question. How was Luffy able to defeat Crocodile when a punch with no haki doesn't even budge a mid-class fighter in the New World? All right. The short answer is Luffy got lucky, and even in that regard, he really didn't get that lucky because he almost died like 3 times during that fight. The first fight between him and Crocodile, he would have straight up died if it wasn't for Robin saving him. And the second battle, even when Luffy was aware of Crocodile's weakness of water at that point, still, he could have lost that fight quite easily if, you know, the water did not land right back on him and rehydrate him. So, since Crocodile is a Logia, from what we understand, and before Haki was really introduced into the story, most Logias have a natural elemental weakness. So, like, for example, Crocodile has the Suna Suna no Mi, which is the sand fruit. He's a dehydration human, essentially. However, its weakness is actually water. Now, that's on top of the regular devil fruit weakness, which is already water being submerged in it. However, Crocodile is like quad weak to water in like Pokemon terminology, okay? Just having water splashed on him is a weakness because that does not allow his sand to separate like most Logias with their element. So that means as long as Crocodile is doused with water or any kind of liquid, doesn't have to be water. Luffy used blood, like orange juice would work as well. Anything that's a liquid, he won't be able to turn into sand, and then you can physically punch him. Now, it also does sort of have a built-in defense mechanism for that, because with his devil fruit ability, he can absorb any type of moisture with his right hand, but I believe it was stated it has to be his right hand. So in theory, if Crocodile was doused with water, he could easily just, you know, suck up all the moisture around him, and then, you know, the weakness would be nullified. But for that brief moment when he is doused with water, he is vulnerable. And it was even stated in SBS that Crocodile, even when he's taking a shower or a bath, he's technically very weak to the point where he could be attacked. However, Crocodile is an expert in other forms of combat, so he's like, you know, I'm gonna take a shower power, and if somebody jumps me, he would still be able to have the battle prowess to defend himself. But yeah, the answer to the question of how was Luffy able to defeat Crocodile, he got very, very lucky quite a few times. He had a lot of help, and he was able to figure out the weakness being water. If it wasn't for that, and if it wasn't for that Crocodile had that specific weakness, I don't think Luffy would have been able to beat him in that arc. Next question. Still want to know what time One Piece is. I think you mean just like, what is the One Piece? The One Piece treasure, of course, what the series is named after. Okay. So, of course, that's the big payoff, right? Like, we're all waiting for that. Like, the series has been in serialization since 1997, which is over 25 years now, a quarter of a century, and we still do not know what the One Piece is. However, Oda has actually done an interview before where he did state what the One Piece isn't, and it was the question of, is the One Piece going to turn out to be something intangible, like, you know, the journey was the treasure the whole time, or it was the friends that we made along the way. Like, Luffy finds Laugh Tale, he opens up the big treasure doors, and it's nothing in there but like a mirror, and the mirror is like the Straw Hats, and Luffy's like, you know, the Straw Hats, my friends, those are the real treasure. So Oda came out and clarified that's not going to be what it is. It's not going to be some bullshit like that where it's like, oh no, it turns out like it was actually the friends we made along the way. No, in fact, if you want a One Piece story that basically ends with that sort of message, go and watch the first One Piece movie ever made. It was just literally called One Piece the Movie. I think it came out in the year 2000. It's a short watch. I did a video on it on the channel. It's only about 55 minutes long. And the ending of that movie, spoilers, is basically like the treasure of this great pirate, not Roger, another pirate just for the movie. The treasure of this great pirate was just the friends he made along the way. That was basically it if you want that story. I feel like that's a very contrived, very standard trope in especially any type of pirate fiction, so I don't think Oda would be so rote as to make that the big payoff after 25 years in the story. Oda has also stated he's aware of what the One Piece treasure is. It's not like he just came up with it at the very end like, oh crap, I don't know what this is going to be. He does have an idea, and he did specify that it is going to be some type of physical reward for the Straw Hat crew when they reach that place. It's also an interesting note as a caveat, while the fans would probably not be very much happy with like it being the journey the whole time or something intangible like that. I feel Luffy as just a character, if that did turn out what the One Piece was, like if it really was nothing whatsoever and Luffy just turns and looks to his crew and thinks that like, wow, this amazing once-in-a-lifetime journey I had, all the friends that I made along the way. Luffy himself as the main character of the story, I think would be perfectly content with that and then just go off onto the next adventure, whatever that would be. But don't worry. Whatever the One Piece treasure is, it's going to be something very physical that the Straw Hats are going to be able to actually like interact with, whatever it is. Next up, why did Usopp's Kuro Kabuto change in the Wano arc? It now resembles his old Kabuto. The Kuro Kabuto was a shorter version. Why did Oda change it without any explanation? So it actually did not change. The Kuro Kabuto, the black Kabuto that Usopp developed while he was training on the Boeing Islands, is actually partly a plant, or maybe the whole thing might actually be a plant. We don't exactly know how Usopp made the thing because his original Kabuto was built out of like metal and it had the dials from Skypiea in it. But from what we understood, from what we saw during Punk Hazard and Dressrosa as well, the Kuro Kabuto has the ability to grow in size depending on how much water Usopp feeds to it. In fact, the part of the slingshot that Usopp actually loads the ammo into, that part is actually the mouth of the plant, sort of like a Venus flytrap, kind of like carnivorous plant sort of thing, or like Audrey from Little Shop of Horrors, something like that. And so if Usopp provides enough water, it will actually grow up in size to the point where it can reach ridiculous proportions, essentially like a ballista or something, firing shots super long range. So it's actually a great weapon for Usopp, where he has the ability to have like the short Kuro Kabuto for like, you know, maybe close range, medium range combat, and then he can extend it to a much longer shaft, as it were, for long range combat. And then he has like the super jumbo size Kuro Kabuto, which is like bigger than his own body. He needs to like, you know, drag the sling back with his like entire body, like he's like loading a catapult or something, to fire a shot a super long distance away. Like we're talking kilometers away with a slingshot, mind you, okay? That's what he did with the bagworm shot at Dressrosa, where he had to fire the shot from clear across the other side of the city, several kilometers away, through a window, through a particular pane of the window, at a particular elevation to attack Sugar with the bagworm star, so she can be like scared and get knocked out, and so Luffy and Law were not not turned into toys. As I'm explaining this, I realize if you have never seen One Piece before, this is a really weird video. But basically, yeah, that's the situation where the Kabuto did not change. While he was at Wano, while he was at the Battle of Onigashima, he basically fed the Kuro Kabuto more water to grow to a size that was reminiscent of his original Kabuto. And maybe if there's a shot in the anime, I'm not really sure what scene you're particularly referencing, but if there was a shot in the anime maybe of where he has his original green Kabuto, yeah, that's not in the actual story unless he painted it, but I doubt it. So yeah, he still has the Kuro Kabuto in the manga. Next question. My biggest question is still, WTF are these? Okay, so this is a shot of the end of the Thriller Bark arc in the anime, and as you can see, there are these very large, kind of eldritch, like old one, you know, Cthulhuoid, Lovecraftian creatures kind of in the mists of the Florian Triangle. The Florian Triangle is the allegory to the Devil's Triangle or the Bermuda Triangle in our world. The island there is the island of Thriller Bark, which was actually an island converted into a pirate ship where most of the arc took place. But as the arc ended, we sort of like zoom the camera back, and the narrator kind of says like, it's a good thing the mists of the Florian Triangle were particularly thick that day, for the Straw Hats did not see what loomed above them. So the Straw Hats never actually saw these things. Lola sort of saw them in the distance, but she wasn't really sure what she was seeing. So yeah, we still do not know what these are, but if these things are individual creatures, as we can see the eyes from one of them are glowing, it would be the case these things are easily one of the largest beings in all of One Piece. Keep in mind, they are also floating on the water, so their full bodies are probably underneath the water, and they may even rival Zunisha in size. Zunisha, the giant elephant, which is 35 kilometers tall. That is a giant elephant that walks on the bottom of the ocean and extends well into like the stratosphere, essentially. So yeah, we don't exactly know what these things are. I like to think they're Oda's take on like Lovecraftian lore, so like the old ones like Cthulhu and other creatures of that nature. It's also entirely possible that they might not all be separate creatures. These might be like the eye stalks of like a larger creature that is like so much bigger, like maybe bigger than any Sea King or even Zunisha that lurks under the ocean. One of the great mysteries of One Piece, and I hope it is revealed at some point because these things were freaky as hell. Next question. Early on in One Piece, people will say, he ate the fruit of the blank blank tree. Was that a translation error or a genuine quirk of the series that kind of implies there could have been multiple, say, Gum Gum fruits from the original Gum Gum tree? So I think what you're referring to may in fact be an original translation error. However, Oda did toy around with this idea a little bit in his prequel series to One Piece. Not really prequel series, it was sort of like a one-shot before One Piece really got going. He did 2 different volumes of Romance Dawn. Romance Dawn Volume 1, and then Romance Dawn Volume 2, and then finally Romance Dawn, the beginning arc of One Piece. Oda really loves the term Romance Dawn. He was really set on that being like the beginning arc of his story. So in that original concept, though, Oda thought that maybe the Gum Gum fruit, you know, Luffy's devil fruit, was actually not something that was part of a larger group of devil fruits. The idea was that there was a particular tree called the Gum Gum tree, and the Gum Gum fruit grows on that tree. I think it's like once every 50 years or something, a fruit grows, and if you eat it, you become a rubber human. Oda changed it around so that devil fruits are now more wide and abundant. They don't grow on any specific trees, and from what we've seen with the Punk Hazard arc, when Smiley, Caesar's pet that had the axolotl zone, when Smiley died, the fruit actually turned from a regular apple into a devil fruit. So it doesn't even need to be on a vine or on a tree or on a bush in order to properly become a devil fruit. A apple that had been picked from the tree hours or maybe days ago turned into a devil fruit all the same. So yeah, that's just something maybe left over from the original concept of what One Piece was before Oda really got the main story written. Next question. Which fruit did Luffy eat? I'm still kind of confused. All right, so Luffy, originally we assumed he ate the Gamu Gamu no Mi, and this is spoilers for something later on in the manga, so if you're not up to that point yet, you know, probably around chapter 1040. If you're not up to that point yet, probably should stop watching the video. But it was actually revealed that Luffy's devil fruit was not in fact referred to as well. It was the Gamu Gamu no Mi, but this was a false name that the Gorosei, the leaders of the entire world government essentially, gave the fruit to hide its true nature from the rest of the world. Luffy's true devil fruit name is the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika. or the English translation, the human fruit model Nika. Nika being the sun deity in the One Piece world that was also just recently mentioned in the last arc of the Wano arc. And so it's a big deal for a bunch of different reasons. So number one, Luffy's fruit was originally thought to be a paramecia class, and instead it's now actually a mythical zone, which is a completely different category of devil fruit, which leads to Luffy's awakening being very different from every other, paramecia awakening, even very different from other zone awakenings, because Luffy has this weird kind of amalgam of abilities now. It is definitely going to be relevant because the sun god Nika, when we're finding out about that individual or that actual deity that really existed, there's also connections back to Joy Boy in that figure. So if I'm going to assume something, I'm going to assume that the sun god Nika existed for thousands and thousands of years, and then Joy Boy during the Void Century had the power of the Gum Gum fruit or the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika. And then the fruit was reincarnated several times, and the Gorosei even mentioned that other people have eaten this fruit throughout the centuries. It's just that the only people that were able to awaken it to our knowledge were Joy Boy himself and Luffy in the story. So it's a very integral fruit, very important, and the Gorosei seem rather perturbed by the fact that it's now out there in the world that Luffy has it and that he has awakened to this ability of the Gear Fifth, of his awakening of the Sun God form. So it's a very, very important fruit, and the government was even willing to have, like, Cypher Pole 9 guard it, and after they failed, after Shanks stole the fruit, Who's Who was like their top assassin, was basically jailed and tortured because of his failure. So yeah, very, very important fruit. How important is it going to be? Well, I guess we're just gonna have to wait until later in the story. Next question. Why does Oda let characters who commit horrible crimes live another day? So I think that is a few different reasons. So number one, typically the formula in One Piece is that you have the big bad in each individual arc. Like you'll have Kaido in Wano, you'll have Big Mom in Totland, you'll have Lucci in Enies Lobby, you'll have Crocodile in Alabasta. Typically, Luffy will fight against the big bad and defeat them. And Luffy pretty much never kills any main villain. I think Luffy has definitely killed random characters throughout the story just by smacking them into giant boiling vats of blood, like an Impel Down. But when it comes to the big bad, Luffy doesn't usually kill them, and this was a question even Oda addressed, where he basically said, from Luffy's perspective, defeating them and crushing their dreams or their aspirations or whatever they had basically kind of gives them a second chance. If they're dead, then they're pretty much done with, and they can't, continue to move on and maybe improve themselves. So the idea of defeating them in that way, number one, kind of crushes them, kind of demoralizes them in a sense, because their aspirations were completely destroyed by Luffy. This is the case with Crocodile. This was the case with Eneru as well, to an extent. And so Luffy just doesn't kill them for that reason. Also, just from an idea from a storytelling perspective, why does Oda let characters who committed horrible crimes live to see another day? Probably because that's more storytelling down the line. And just think about it as a parallel to our world. There's people throughout history that have committed horrible crimes and lived to see another day to commit more terrible crimes. I would rather feel a little bit less of Oda if in every single story arc, Luffy just immediately killed the enemy and then they're not around anymore, and then we just move forward and tie everything up in a nice little bow and ribbon. Even after Luffy defeats enemies, by the way, it doesn't make everything all right. Sometimes they repent, I guess, and kind of go and change their ways, and other times they do not. So we just actually don't really know what's going to happen with each individual character. That's why Oda's writing is so good. But whatever they do seem to do, it's even when characters do decide to become good, like Helmeppo was originally not a great person at the beginning of the story. Now he's a Marine and he's best friends with Kobe, and he seems to be a much better person. That character progression seems very natural to them. Whereas you have other characters like Crocodile who were defeated by Luffy. Crocodile did not immediately become a good person because Luffy defeated him, and he's just like, all right, I guess I'm going to change my perspective. He did change his perspective, but it's another angle now. So in that case, you could honestly argue, if Crocodile does end up doing some really horrible things in the world, which he probably most likely has in the 2-year time skip, that's kind of, you could blame Luffy for not ending him right there at Alabasta, but that's just not how Luffy rolls. Okay, what's the deal with different types of sky people? I still have no idea. All right, so from what we understand right now in the One Piece story, there are 3 distinct races that live in the sky, on the Sky Islands. First are the Skypians, such as Konus and her father Paguya, who live on Angel Island. They seem to be the most widespread of sky races, there's the most of them. They all dress in a particular way, and they have their hair styled in the antennas, and they have feathery white, kind of like angel wings on their back, which actually, tip upwards, so they bend sort of up upward. Then you have the Shandians. The Shandians such as Wiper and Kalgara was originally a Shandian way back in the day. Their wings also bend upwards, and they have much more of like a Native American sort of aesthetic. So like the body paint, like the war paint that they go in to fight, and everything from just like their style of dress is very much indicative of the Native American culture, which is what Oda based them on. And then we have the Bjerkans. Now the Bjerkans' wings actually are different from the Skypians and the Shandians. They actually bend downwards instead. So examples of this would be like a Rouge. A Rouge is a Bjerkan. Now, from what we understand, Eneru, this is actually his homeland that he destroyed. He mentioned he destroyed Bjerka. Now, Bjerka, I like to think, was either a really big island, maybe even the biggest in all of the Sky Islands, maybe the Sky Island like capital, or it was like a cluster of a bunch of different kingdoms, because it seems like a lot of things tie back to Bjerka. Eneru mentioned that the jet dials originated from Bjerka, and he took a bunch of them before he destroyed it. Also, it was mentioned that Haradus, who was the weather wizard that helped Nami learn about weather science on Weatheria, was originally born on Bjerka. And so a lot of other characters, such as Arouge, have origin there. So I'm thinking Bjerka was a very prominent land in the sky before Eneru destroyed it. So Eneru himself actually does not have wings, because he has Tomoe drums on his back where his wings should be, which implies to me, it was never confirmed, that Eneru actually ripped off his own wings and replaced them with the Tomoe drums, maybe possibly because he viewed himself as a god, as a deity, so he felt like he had to be a higher status than everyone else. But from what we've seen with Eneru's priests, like Satori, Gedatsu, Ohm, and Shura, they all have the Bjerkan wings that bend downwards. So those are the different sky races, and from what we understand, they all originated from the moon. When Eneru does eventually go to the Fairy Verth, or the Endless Verth, or the moon in One Piece, he finds a giant mural in this ancient city, and it depicts 3 different individuals, 2 that have upturned wings and 1 that has downturned wings, representing the 3 sky races: Skypian, Bjerkan, and Shandian, all descending from the moon because of a lack of resources and making an existence on the blue world of One Piece. So there you go. Next question. I've heard the concept of Skypiea being a microcosm of the greater story, or essentially the ship in the bottle compared to the aircraft carrier that is the full story. That is a perfect way to sum it up. What evidence is there that supports this theory? Oh my god, so we could literally make an entire dedicated video just about this, but essentially, when the Straw Hats go to Skypiea, it's sort of like a separate area from the rest of the Grand Line, right? It's in the sky, okay? So I think Oda really took that opportunity to be like, I'm going to essentially condense the basic plot of One Piece into a singular arc, and at the time, it was the longest story arc in One Piece, all the way up until Dressrosa. I believe it ranks 3rd now. I think Wano is definitely the longest arc, then Dressrosa, then Skypiea. So there's a lot of different references here. Probably the most notable one is actually something that was recently shown in one of the last chapters, so I don't want to spoil it. Well, okay, spoiler alert for chapter 1000 and anything after 1050, I'll basically just say. So if you don't want to hear anything about that, stop the video now. But essentially, the big one that just happened was the destruction of the Lulusia Kingdom in the One Piece world by means of a giant world-destroying apocalyptic weapon that could just fire lasers and just obliterate an island in a single shot. That was essentially the One Piece version of a nuke that the world government, specifically EAM, has at their disposal. This is very similar to the Death Pia technique that Eneru used to destroy all of Angel Island. Eneru created this giant mass of electricity and then just completely wiped an island off the face of the map. Like Skypiea, Angel Island is no longer around now because of Eneru's actions. Speaking of Eneru, he is also a big reason on why a lot of people consider Skypiea to be the microcosm of the whole story. Eneru is a character that sets himself up as a god, that he rules over his entire land, very similar to the way that the world government and the Gorosei and EAM set themselves up as the deities that actually control the world. The Celestial Dragons are the prime example of this. He has great power, so therefore he exerts that great power like by a might makes right sort of mentality, and he was also defeated by Luffy, who bears the will of D. It was stated that those who bear the will of D are enemies of God. So in this sense, it's very literal, like basically beating you over the head with it. Like, you know, Luffy has the will of D, he's an enemy of God, literally punching out Eneru, who takes the form of this giant lightning god, and, you know, Luffy wins. Okay, so it's a very literal way in that sense, but also you can take it, look from a more other perspective of like the Celestial Dragons being, you know, setting themselves up as gods, not actually being gods, but like, you know, identifying as gods, and then Luffy and the other members of the Will of D are enemies to the world government's like perfect structure, their status quo, so to speak. Okay, you could also look at it like the entire time the Straw Hats are in Skypiea, they're looking for a great treasure, which is the City of Gold, and more specifically the Golden Belfry. So you can kind of look at that like, okay, the whole idea is like everybody's looking for a great treasure, which is the One Piece. You know, like Eneru's group, the Shandians, everybody's sort of looking for this Golden Bell, and they do end up finding it. And so you can look at it like the Golden Bell representing the One Piece. You can look at Eneru representing Eam or the world government. You can look at the destruction of Angel Island being the destruction of the Lelucia Kingdom. Eneru's raw power basically representing the raw, unabashed power of the world government, and the truly destructive force that we've seen that they can wrought with that laser weapon that destroyed Lelucia. I'm thinking it's an ancient weapon. We just don't know yet. It's almost as if like Eam or the world government, you know, whoever was around 800 years ago, Eam might be some kind of immortal being. We really don't know. But let's say Eam was around during the Void Century. Eam was the one that sort of figured out, like, oh, I can control this entire world with, like, sheer brute force and power. And, you know, cut to, you know, way later, like centuries and centuries later, Eneru basically arrived at the same conclusion, just on a much smaller scale, where he consumed the Goro Goro no Mi, which is the Rumble Rumble fruit, allowing him to control electricity and turn his body into lightning. Very, very powerful ability. And so he basically was like, oh, I can basically rule over all of Skypiea with my power because, you know, I have the most supreme ability that no one else can rival until he encountered Luffy. You could also look at it like the idea that Luffy has rubber, and rubber does not conduct electricity, so that's another, you know, another parallel to Luffy defeating a god. All right, so they're there. There's definitely way more than that, but just like as a basic crash course, those are the comparisons that are the most obvious to me. Next up, how do people backtrack so easily on the Grand Line? You say Grand Sire, which is something different. I'm assuming you meant Grand Line. If their poses are pointed to the island ahead of them. Okay, so there are two different types of log poses in the Grand Line that you need to navigate by. So the Grand Line is has crazy magnetic electrical charges, and so a regular compass like north, south, east, and west, which, by the way, those do exist in the One Piece world. They just don't work in the Grand Line in Paradise or the New World. You got to use a special type of compass called the log pose, and the log pose locks onto that magnetic pole of the next island in line. So you're basically just traveling the Grand Line like piece by piece, not really sure what the next island's going to be. It's just whatever island the compass points to. Now, there's another compass that you can use to travel the Grand Line, and that is the Eternal Compass, or the Eternal Pose, which I have back here, which it basically stays fixated to a single island at all times. So this is a Eternal Pose to the land of Wano. So this compass will always point to Wano no matter where you're at, no matter what you do, whereas the log pose will change its magnetic polarity depending on what island you're on. So how do people backtrack so easily on the Grand Line if they always have to keep pointing ahead of them? Most of them have Eternal Poses. The Marines have like an entire cache of Eternal Poses. Basically, Smoker was like, you know, I need to requisition an Eternal Pose to Alabasta because I need to go to Alabasta. So I'm sure most of the Marine vessels have an entire slew of Eternal Poses because they need to go to a specific island at a specific point without sailing blindly. I imagine you could also utilize other forms of cartography and, you know, seafaring travel just like we did back in the day with, like, you know, star navigation and stuff like that. But the Eternal Pose is like the easiest way to do it in the One Piece world. Next question. How do ships without sea stone go back to the Blues? Do they have to use Reverse Mountain backwards? Okay, so Reverse Mountain is the mountain that exists in the center of the world, basically like where the equator would be in our world, and it's the main entrance to the Grand Line for most ships, where there are different rivers or flows of water that go up each individual blue, so north, south, east, and west, and at the very top there's a fifth current that goes down and it drops you into the Grand Line. So for that reason, you cannot effectively, you know, sail up the Grand Line side of Reverse Mountain and then go back down. And the situation with is most of the Marine and government ships have sea stone, so they can travel through the Calm Belt pretty easily, the Calm Belt being those two seas that border the Grand Line that are surrounded by Sea King nests, and also the Calm Belt gets its name from the lack of wind. So if you have a sailing vessel, you won't be able to go through. You need some way to propel your vessel, either like through oars, like actual like rowing your ship, or paddles could do it as well, some kind of machinations. It really just goes down to the idea that the One Piece world is always improving because of Vegapunk's inventions. And so the Calm Belt is becoming less and less of a stopgap for preventing people from entering and leaving the Grand Line. Now, it is possible for you to just chance it and just go through the Calm Belt and just hope that you make it through the other side. As is the case with Don Krieg's fleet, they did make it out of the Grand Line back into the East Blue, but it looked pretty trashed, and most of their ships, they had like 50 ships in their armada, and the only one that survived was the flagship that was heavily, heavily damaged, Krieg's flagship, the Dreadnought Saber. And so you know, it's kind of like a chance it sort of situation. Like if you're halfway through paradise and you just like you want to give up and you just want to try to go back to the east or the south or whatever, you can try. You might succeed, very low minimal chance, but you will probably get devoured by sea kings in the process. But yeah, Marines and world government officials, they don't really have to worry about this too much. But yeah, you cannot use reverse mountain backwards. So once you're in the Grand Line, you're locked in. Either you go through the adventure on the Grand Line, or you give up and just stay on one of the islands, or you try to leave the Grand Line. But all of those options have their individual risks, and so going into the Grand Line was considered like, you know, basically a death sentence for pirates for many decades and centuries. It was called the pirate graveyard for a long time, and then the New World is even more so dangerous. So that's the reason. I know that this has been answered in the story, but I can't remember. How does Brooke's devil fruit work? I tried explaining it to a friend the other day, and I realized I didn't really know either. Oh, Brooke. He is such an interesting character, right? Yo! Okay, so Brooke ate the Yomi Yomi no Mi, or the Revive fruit, effectively making him a revive human. He, basically, to explain it in very quick terms, like if somebody asks you how does Brooke's devil fruit work, it guarantees him a second life. That is the basic way to start with this. So he consumed the fruit when he was still alive, obviously, and it didn't really give him any effects at the beginning other than the standard devil fruit weaknesses, which he could not swim. However, when he died, it allowed his soul to return to his body. So we don't know much about how the afterlife works in One Piece, but we know a little bit, and most of it is actually from Brooke's story. So Brooke was poisoned on the Rumbar ship 50 years ago. He died on the deck of the ship, and his body, you know, began to decompose just like any other body would. His soul, which souls exist in the One Piece world, his soul left his body and went up to the afterlife. However, it was rejected. It was basically pushed back into the mortal realm because of the revive fruit. Now, normally, if Brooke would have been able to, if his soul would have been able to make it back to his original body before it decomposed, no problem, he would have been revived, and he would have looked just like, you know, flesh and bone human, just like you or me. Unless you're a skeleton watching this video right now. You might be, who knows. But anyway, however, he was still limited by sight, and the place that he died happened to be the most, like, foggy sea in the entire world, which was the Florian Triangle. So Brooke's soul could not actually find the place where he originally died for an entire year. And by the time that Brooke did find the ship and did find his body, he was rotted into a skeleton form. However, it's okay, because the fruit will guarantee you a second life no matter what the state of your original body is in. So Brooke's soul was able to go into the skeleton body, and it was animated, and Brooke is now guaranteed a second life. I don't think this means that he will live forever. I think that eventually he will die. People have said, well, because of aging, the process of aging, he has none of those faculties anymore, so therefore he might not, you know, he might be able to live forever. The way I look at it is that he's not immortal. The way I look at it is the fruit is magical, and it's basically allowing him to continue his existence for another lifespan. Maybe like take his original lifespan. Let's say Brooke was originally supposed to live 80 years and then double that, so that maybe the fruit will make him live 160 years maximum. Although he did die when he was 38, and he's actually spent more time undead than alive, and now he's 90 years old. So I think maybe like another 80 or 90 years, like the normal lifespan of a human being, he might die. I know people have brought up like, well, he doesn't have a heart, so how's his heart going to fail? He doesn't have a brain, so he can't get brain cancer or anything like that. He can't suffer any of the natural aging effects that normally humans would. So therefore, doesn't that mean he'll live forever? And I'm just like, it's devil fruits. It's kind of like magic a little bit. So it's like the fruit guarantees you a second normal life, and then you will probably die. That's the way I view it. That's how the revive fruit works. There's other aspects of the fruit, like him being able to channel the chill of the underworld, but that's maybe getting a little bit too complicated. So essentially, that's what Brooke's devil fruit, the Yomi Yomi no Mi, does. Guarantees you a second life regardless of what condition your body is in. You can also still taste and see and hear and smell like a normal body can. Why are whales so important and relevant to the story? I mean, whales are always relevant, but I mean, they're always there in one way or another, present in every single arc. Well, maybe not every arc, but they're around quite a bit. Laboon, the whale fountain, the Lobby Dick, I'm assuming you meant the Moby Dick, which is the flagship of Whitebeard's crew, and the whale tree, etc. Yeah, Oda definitely seems to be focusing on whales a lot. Brooke's companion, Laboon, who is the island whale that is currently residing at the Twin Capes with Crocus, that is a very important important part of the Straw Hats' journey, because when they met Brooke and they explained their history with Laboon, Brooke was like overjoyed that, like, you know, Laboon is still alive. There was also the entire pod of island whales that we saw when the Straw Hats were, ascending from Fishman Island, entering the New World. So they're there as well. Pay close attention to the fact that Laboon had this habit of crashing his head against the Grand Line or against the Red Line over and over and over again, to the point where he got all scarred up. And the same situation occurred with all the other pods of island whales. So originally you could assume that Laboon was bashing his head against the Red Line because he wanted to meet his friends. He wanted to get into the Grand Line. He wanted to see, the Rumbar pirates again, like Yorkie and everybody. However, the other pod of island whales have never met the Rumbar pirates. They seem to just be pounding their heads against the Red Line for another reason. That makes me think that the Red Line is not a naturally occurring thing, and it's actually something that's disrupting their migration path, like a lot of other animals in the world that we live in. For example, butterflies in our world will have migration paths that will sometimes like loop in this strange pattern that makes no sense. Like, why are the butterflies traveling in a straight line and then all of a sudden going in this massive circle and then just to go straight again? And the idea is maybe a long time ago during their migration history, there was a mountain or something in the way that's no longer there because of like erosion or whatever. And so it's still ingrained in the insects' kind of like migration, like instinct, that they have to go around this mountain even though the mountain's not there anymore. Something like that. I think the migration path of island whales meant them going through the Red Line, where the Red Line is right now. And so it was placed there a long time ago. Not exactly sure how the Red Line was built, or even if it is unnatural, it's just a theory. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, the whale tree at Zoe is the place where the road poneglyph was housed. It's like the sacred land of the minks that also bears the mark of the Kozuki clan, which they have like that sworn brotherhood with. The Moby Dick, which is of course the famous novel written by Herman Melville in our world, but is also the flagship of Whitebeard's Yonko fleet in the One Piece world. That's also another reference to whales. I feel like Oda is going to reveal that whales are very important to the story at one point. The whale sharks that came to rescue the impelled down prisoners that Jinbei called. The fact that Jinbei in and of himself is a whale shark fishman. These are all going to tie back into being relevant at some point. So just pay attention to the whales. Next up, since Luffy did not and does not know the true name of his devil fruit, how do people who don't know the name of their devil fruit find out what it is? Did Ace just come up with the name Maramara no Mi since he found it on a deserted island? So this is something that's been a point of contention. For a very long time, I believed that the original way that Oda set this up was that as soon as you eat the devil fruit, so as soon as you eat this fruit, you instantly know the name. Like, it psychically like communicates with you like this is the name of the fruit. That clearly seems to not be the case, since the Gorosei could change the name to the Gumu Gumu no Mi to begin with. We do know that there are devil fruit encyclopedias that are books in the One Piece world. They're kind of rare, but they do exist, and they have a catalog of a bunch of different devil fruits, and some of them have images, some of them don't. They all keep the same naming scheme, which I always found a little strange. Like, for example, if you ate this fruit and you got fire powers, why do you have to name it the same as everyone else in the world? Like, why can't you just call this, like, you know, the hell fruit or whatever, the powers of hell, whereas every other devil fruit has Mera Mera, Gumu Gumu, Bara Bara, Goro Goro, Gura Gura, you know, all those different kinds of devil fruit abilities. They all have the exact same naming scheme. I think it's just because that's the way the naming scheme was written down in the book, and that everybody in the world just kind of universally accepts it. Honestly, it's just the way Oda wants to call them that, so everybody calls the devil fruits the same exact, you know, process with like the double sounding syllables. That's basically it. But yeah, I would imagine like Ace eating the Maramara no Mi, considering it's such a basic ability, the Logia that allows you to control fire. I would assume Ace could probably guess at the ability, and he'd probably get pretty damn close. Also, a lot of times Oda will use onomatopoeia, so I believe the onomatopoeia for the Maramara no Mi is the sound of like fire, like the sound of fire, like flaming, okay? So a lot of times we'll do that, like the sound of certain things, like, you know, Gumu Gumu no Mi, the sounds of like rubber stretching or retracting is like the onomatopoeia for that, which was what Oda will usually go with there. So yeah, in the case with Ace, he might have not known the name right away, but he probably could have guessed and probably would have been accurate. Also, he could have found a devil fruit at some point, a devil fruit encyclopedia at some point, and he could have seen that, oh, I have the Maramara no Mi, and he started calling it that, and there you go. But yeah, in other ways, like in the land of Wano, you can eat the fruit and you don't have access. You don't even know what devil fruits are. You call them like a type of sorcery. So Kinemon, for example, had the clothing no Mi, but he didn't call it that. He called it clothing jutsu or something like that. Same thing with Shinobu, who had the ripe fruit. She called it her ripe ninjutsu, because she didn't actually know that it was like a specific naming scheme. Although, once again, still kept the same basic, like, double syllables, which is interesting to me. No matter where you are in the world, no matter where you eat the fruit, no matter what your background, you call it by that double name, which made me think that devil fruits are somewhat, like, magical. They can, like, influence your psyche a little bit, but not to the point where you know the name. So, what it is. Next up, why is the technology on so many different levels in the One Piece world? Like, some people have their own personal giant robots with laser guns, and others have to use candles for light. It's normal that some parts of the world are more advanced than others, but the gap is insane. Yeah, you are right, and the reason for that is quite simply because the One Piece world is very massive, and a lot of the different islands, most of the land on One Piece are different islands, so geography is everything. I've been saying it for years. There are a lot of discrepancies between islands. So you could have one island over here that's really advanced and has technology maybe contemporary with stuff that we'd see today, and another island that's, you know, maybe 100 miles away, but it's so isolated by the different ocean currents or weather patterns or whatever, especially in the Grand Line, they might be still stuck in the Middle Ages. It's just an idea of, like, imagine how our world would be if instead of the 7 major continents, we only had one continent and everything else was broken up into a bunch of different island nations. I think there'd be a massive discrepancy of the way the technology would travel and the way that we would be at. I don't think we would be at the same situation right now with computers and electricity and the internet and cell phones and everything if we lived in a world where everything was divided by islands, okay? Then, of course, you have the world government, who also probably has a hand in kind of manipulating, like, what technology is going to go where. Then you have Vegapunk, who is this brilliant scientist that works for the government that is 500 years above his contemporaries. So Vegapunk's technology is literally like robot technology, laser technology, you know, radio communications technology, stuff that really doesn't really exist in the normal way in the One Piece world. But yeah, the gap is insane, and yes, it is. Sometimes it's a very anachronistic kind of setting where in some cases it's like a sailing sort of pirate tale that takes place in like the 1500s, like, yarg matey, we be sailing, and then it's like, okay, we have a sailing ship, but it has electricity and like a refrigerator on board. So I admit it's a little bit anachronistic, but that's kind of the whole point. That adds more flavor to Oda's world, how everything is so broken up. It would make sense that every island would probably have a different level of technology that they're at. Next question. Are Sanji's flames due to his Germa DNA? I love the little DNA emoji there. Or did he just happen to have that ability like Zoro and Ashura? So the explanation that Oda gave initially was that Sanji's passion just burns so hotly that he's able, hotly fiery, that he's able to basically light his legs on fire. Considering Oda has done other examples of this in the past, I just assumed that was the actual canonical reason. But as from what we saw during the last arc at Wano, I'm going to say that yes, it is because of the fact that Sanji was modified by German technology. It just took a longer time for his outer shell to develop and his special abilities. He now has his outer casing of shell, the same as the rest of the Germa, but his personality, his mind, is still who he always was. So he was worried he was going to turn into like Ichiji, Niji, Yonji, his brothers that are very callous, that have no emotions, that lack any form of empathy, but that does not seem to be the case, and yet he has like a really cool power-up regardless. So yeah, I think it's the idea that he has the Diabo Jambe and now the Ifrit Jambe is because of his DNA modifications, and Queen even mentioned to Sanji that, like, oh, that ability, it doesn't seem like a Lunarian, it doesn't seem like you have a devil fruit, and Queen is a man of science that worked alongside Vegapunk, so he brought that up to Sanji. It's also impossible, I mean, it's also very possible that Sanji might have always chalked it up to like, oh, my heart just burns with such passion that I was able to light my leg on fire. That might have been honestly the best explanation that Sanji could really give for how he's able to use Diabo Jambe. So that initial explanation that Oda gave in the SBS, like with the passion of his heart and everything like that, burning so hot, you know, that might have been what Sanji just like, oh, that must be the reason why I can light my leg on fire, right? But in reality, there is actually a genetic reason why he's able to do that. Good question. Next up, how is the One Piece world simultaneously undiscovered, but also mostly connected with Video Den Mushi, and also does the internet exist in One Piece? So no, they don't have the internet in One Piece. However, they do have, as you mentioned, Den Mushi. So Den Mushi are basically a species of psychic snails that exist in the One Piece world. There's a bunch of different varieties of them. They are basically able to communicate with others of their own species over a vast psychic network, and human beings in the One Piece world basically take advantage of that and keep the Dendenmushis as pets and attach various little rotary dials and receivers and speakers and transistors and things to the Dendenmushi, taking advantage of their psychic network. So in a sense, like, there is a telecommunications network, but it's not like the internet. It's not like they can like make websites and stuff, because it's literally coming from a living biological being rather than making like computer boards and like coding and stuff like that. So it essentially works as a way to communicate via like text messaging as well as like voice messaging, basically like a phone network, like, you know, telephone network and stuff like that across the world, except instead of using satellites like we do in our world, they use psychic snails in the One Piece world. How is simultaneously the world undiscovered? So I would argue that the vast majority of the One Piece world is discovered. When it comes to the Grand Line, that's the place that the Straw Hats are journeying, that is sort of like the final frontier of the One Piece world, because the New World is still largely mysterious and there's a lot of dangerous weather and like giant monsters and things and other reasons why people cannot just go to the New World and explore it like in detail. So yes, there's still a lot of islands in the New World that have yet to be explored fully, but then you expand outward to the greater world, you see the Four Blues, which make up the vast majority of the surface area on the One Piece planet. Most of all, if not all of the Four Blues have been explored. There is an Arctic region, there is a North Pole, there is a South Pole, and all that jazz in the One Piece world. Probably the same reason they took a long time to be explored in our world is because they're very cold. It's very treacherous to go all the way to the north, all the way to the south. Limitations in food and animals to hunt, you know, so obviously like you wouldn't be able to survive very long in the North, you know, in the North Pole in the One Piece world. And those areas haven't been explored very much, and also the areas in the New World haven't explored very much. Especially like the perfect example of that is Laugh-Tale, an island which is, you know, notoriously difficult to get to because it's probably surrounded by a bunch of like different weather patterns that you don't want to get close to, okay? But I would say on average, I would probably say the majority of the One Piece world, probably like over 90% of it, has probably been explored properly. Next question. Why does Chopper not have a full human form? Even his human form doesn't blend in with a normal human crowd. Like, how do other zones like Dalton or Drake do? So yeah, so that's an interesting point. Whereas like, let's say when Dalton goes into his full bison form, he looks like a bison. There's really not a lot of comparisons to his human form. In some cases, let's say, for example, if you have a scar, like let's say you're missing an eye, if you turn into a bison or whatever animal you have, you will also be missing an eye, so that's a comparison. But in most cases, you will not retain any former representation of who you were as a human. You will be just pure animal. So in the case with Chopper, though, it's unique because when he goes into his human form, he doesn't really look like a human, like a Homo sapien, like you or me. He kind of looks like a Yeti sort of creature, which may in fact hint that his devil fruit is not just the normal Hito Hitonomi, might actually be the mythical Hito Hitonomi model Yeti, or it could be an ancient version of the Hito Hitonomi, like a Neanderthal comparison, you know, from our world, like way back when, you know, they were more like ape-like ancestors. Might be the situation. Also, Chopper had a blue nose when he was born, and so that blue nose is consistent throughout all of his forms, no matter what. But yeah, I actually think that is a big plot point, and I think that actually might be revealed that Chopper's human fruit is not like the standard human fruit, like turning into like other humans like Luffy and Nami and Usopp that we see in the story. All right, I think I'll be ending it out with this question. I've been going on for a little while now, but this was a lot of fun, so let me know if you like this, and we could do another one of these, because there's no shortage of questions. So why can Chopper talk in deer form when no other animal with a devil fruit can? All right, so I don't think that's actually true. So Chopper has his standard 3 forms, okay? He was originally a reindeer that ate the human fruit, so he turned into his hybrid, which is the tiny little brain point Chopper, and then his full human form. So remember, his original form is the reindeer, okay? But while he's in that original reindeer form, his walk point, he can still talk, even though he's a reindeer, and reindeers don't have like the proper vocal cords. I think that might be what this question is referring to. However, we actually have seen other full zones talk. Like the one that comes to mind immediately is Kaku. Kaku consumed the ox fruit model giraffe, and we saw him turn into a full giraffe initially during his fight with Zoro, mostly because he had not fully controlled his fruit yet. So he originally wanted to go into his hybrid form, but he messed it up and he went into his full giraffe, okay? And that caused the whole ceiling to collapse, and Jabra was there, and Jabra was laughing at him like, "You're a giraffe." And then Kaku, still in his full giraffe form, was like, "Hey, what are you talking about? I love giraffes." giraffes. They're awesome, you know? So I'm sure there's other examples of this. You know, the whole question is like, you know, vocal cords and like the anatomy changes because you're an animal now. But it's an anime, it's One Piece, and it's kind of the same thing. Like, how does, you know, Kaku's jacket expand in size when he becomes a damn giraffe? Same thing with all the other zones. Like, their clothing always changes with them. It's just one of those things like an anime. So yeah, it doesn't matter whatever form you're in. If you are originally capable of speech, or if the devil fruit itself gives you the capability for speech, as did the human fruit for Chopper, you can speak in any form. It doesn't matter if it's your original form or your hybrid form or your full zone beast form. You can talk at any, you know, way, the same way you normally would, as long as, I guess, you have a mouth. So maybe if you had a zone that turns you into some kind of creature that doesn't even have a mouth, I assume you could not talk in that capacity, but in any other ways, yes, you can. So anyway, thank you. That was the video. Those were some great questions, and yeah, go check out the Wired tech support series if you haven't. They're really good stuff there, and yeah, thank you for all the questions. Tekking signing out. Later, everyone.